Hello, everyone. I hope that you're doing well and that you have been staying safe. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mr. Rawls, and I am working alongside Mr. McCollin this semester. I'm student teaching. It's my first semester of student teaching. I'm a senior at UNCW, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the suffrage amendments. And just to go ahead and let you know, some of the slides, as I was converting this PowerPoint for this video, some of the format on the slides are a little bit off, and you'll be able to see where that is. But the content is still all there, so we are good to go. But before we talk about suffrage amendments, we have to begin by talking about what is suffrage. And simply put, it's having the right to vote, and having the right to vote in political elections. And this is a right that a lot of people, or some people, take for granted. We just should consider how certain groups of people have fought to have these rights and to be able to vote. So we should take that into consideration. But also, we need to look at when the Constitution was first ratified. The people that could vote at that point, it was a small percentage of the population. Only white male property owners had the right to vote at the beginning of our nation, and that was really around 10 to 16% of the population, percentage-wise. But different studies show different results. That number kind of varies, but either way, it was a small proportion, and a lot of people were excluded from having that right. And in these next few slides we're going to see how we got from that point, from where it was only white males who owned property who were able to vote, to how we have gotten to where we are today. And in a lot of ways, that process, it's been a long and difficult process, especially for certain groups of people. You can think of women, you can think of minorities, such as African Americans, and the struggle, it's been complex at times. But in this video, we're going to look at some of those amendments, starting with the 15th Amendment. And the 15th Amendment, it says, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on the account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." So in other words, it's giving, this amendment was giving African American men the right to vote. And this was the last of the Reconstruction Amendments. After the Civil War, you can think of the 13th Amendment, the 14th, and here's the 15th. It was the final of those amendments. But just because this amendment, it was ratified in 1870, at that point, things were not all sunshine and rainbows at that point. What I mean by that is there was still voter suppression that took place and continued to take place after this amendment was passed. And some of the ways that occurred was through literacy tests that African Americans had to take before they voted, and they had to pass to be able to vote. And it's unfair because not everyone had to take those tests. So whites on most occasions didn't have to take these same tests to have that right. And if you've seen the movie Selma, there's a scene where the character who is played by Oprah Winfrey, she has to undergo one of these literacy tests before voting, and ultimately she's not able to vote in that situation. And also, intimidation took place in many ways. You know, people trying to intimidate African American voters at the polls and different things like that, and poll taxes as well, to where they had to pay a certain due to be able to vote, which ultimately excluded many people from being able to do so. And we have the Jim Crow laws as well. And to speak about this, we have to think about the Compromise of 1877. During the election that year, it was Rutherford B. Hayes, who was a Republican, who ran against Samuel J. Tilden, and he was the Democratic candidate. And in that election, Hayes won the electoral vote. However, it was Tilden who won the popular vote. And there was kind of a standoff about what they were going to do at that point, who was going to be the president. And the compromise took place where if they were going to allow Hayes to be elected as president, however, these northern Republicans were going to have to withdraw these troops that had been stationed in the South during the Reconstruction years. So it was kind of a trade-off. The Republican candidate Hayes was able to become president, but these troops were drawn out, and because of that, as you can imagine, many of the African Americans who were living in the South during Reconstruction and right after it, they lost this protection that they had from these troops being there. And as a result of these troops leaving the South, governments were able to institute these Jim Crow laws. And some of the things that the Jim Crow laws did was it kept African Americans from being able to vote. It prohibited intermarriage between whites and African Americans, and it allowed segregation to take place as well, a segregation of places. So and this amendment, it was passed in 1870. So you can kind of see that timeline there, because the compromise took place about 7 years later, and it drastically changed what this amendment set out to do originally. So we get to the 17th Amendment, which was ratified in 1913, and it says that the Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, elected by the people thereof for 6 years. Each senator shall have 1 vote. And just real quickly, this amendment is more about who we are voting for rather than who gets to vote. But it's still important information for us to understand as voters, to be more knowledgeable as we make these decisions. And then we get to the 19th Amendment, which is a little bit more popular. I'm sure that this is a review for a lot of us, for a lot of you. And it says that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of sex. So, in other words, simply put, this is when women finally gain the right to vote. And it obviously, so this is 1920, so it just begs the question of why did it take so long? This country, the Constitution had been in place for many years, and it was finally in 1920 whenever women gained this right. And so much work had been done throughout the years. And kind of as a review from other American history classes you've had, you can think about Susan B. Anthony and the work that she did. You can think about the Seneca Falls Convention and other organizations and associations that had been fighting during this women's rights movement. So I think that really at the root of why it took so long is you can think that for those who were in power, they saw this new group of voters as, a potential threat to their own power that they had. Whereas if there's this new group of voters, then they may easily get voted out because of some other candidate that is running against them. And also you can think of the stigmas that were held against women. And so this amendment was finally ratified on August 18th of 1920. And that brings us to the 22nd Amendment. And in this amendment, it says, no person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice. And that's all I really want us to take away from this amendment for the moment, as we're kind of looking at the basics of these amendments. And really the reason for that is to prevent the president, any one president, from gradually gaining too much power over time. And because of this amendment, we know that eventually this president is going to have to leave office. They can't serve for life, and that time limit is set. And the reason why that you can think that this became a big issue was because of FDR, President Roosevelt, and we know that he broke the precedent that had been set by George Washington of serving 2 terms. FDR served for more than 2, and this really had a lot to do with the war that was going on. Traditionally, countries have tried, and governments have tried to avoid exchanging and transitioning power during times of war, because you can just think of a new leader who's coming in, some of the difficulties that they would face, taking office while a war is already going on. But what this 22nd Amendment does is it makes that 2-term limit official, so to speak, and not just a precedent anymore that was set by George Washington. So let's look at the 23rd Amendment. And in this amendment, what it's really getting at is it granted voters in the District of Columbia the right to vote for president and for vice president. And what this is kind of doing, it's kind of healing an inconsistency that had been taking place, because it's easy to argue, if you think about it, for citizens who are living in the District of Columbia. They're U.S. citizens, but it's almost as if they were undergoing taxation without representation, if you think about it, because they weren't able to vote in these elections. They didn't have people representing them, but this amendment kind of heals that inconsistency. It gives them the right to be able to vote for the president and for the vice president, because at the end of the day, they are still U.S. citizens. Looking forward at the 24th Amendment, which was ratified in 1964, it outlawed the poll taxes, which were taxes paid in order to vote in federal elections, and citizens also could not be denied the right to vote due to failure to pay any other tax. So you might remember us talking just a second ago about how one of the ways that voter suppression was taking place in the South was because of this poll tax. So this amendment is combating some of this voter suppression in different ways. And in the civil rights movement, this was a great achievement. It was a great success for those who were leading that movement, because this poll tax had been preventing many African Americans from having the right, being able to vote and being able to participate in these elections. So this was kind of abolished during this time. And when this amendment was passed, there were states such as Virginia, Alabama, Arkansas, and Mississippi who still had poll tax. So this was a great step in the right direction, like I said, for those who had been fighting against this in the civil rights movement. And finally, let's look at the 26th Amendment, which was passed in 1971. And because of this amendment, the right to vote was extended to 18-year-olds, and not just 21-year-olds as it had been. And as I was kind of preparing to teach this lesson to you, I learned something that I didn't know. This amendment was actually one of the fastest processes of ratifying an amendment out of any other of the amendments to the U.S. Constitution. So the process was really fast whenever they started to work on it, and it had a lot to do with the case of Oregon versus Mitchell in 1970. It kind of set and put this work into motion. But the term "old enough to fight," "old enough to vote," if you think it's this, if you think about the time that they were in, 1971, you got the war in Vietnam going on, and 18-year-olds were able to enlist into the military and were able to go fight, and were even being drafted to go and fight. However, even though they were making these great sacrifices overseas, whenever they would get home, they didn't have the right to vote. So you can kind of see some hypocrisy there. And old enough to fight, old enough to vote. It was kind of the rallying cry around the promotion of this amendment, and ultimately it was ratified, and 18-year-olds were given the right to vote. And this is very applicable to many of you, because a lot of you either are 18 already or are getting ready to turn 18 if you're seniors. So it's very applicable to you, and that's how we gain this right. And so we kind of just touched on a lot of the basics on these amendments. We didn't go into a whole lot of detail in any of them, but that was kind of the purpose of this lesson, just to give you a quick overview so that you have that knowledge. So I thank you for tuning in. And if you have any questions, hope maybe there's a way we can contact each other and we can get up with each other. You can just get up with Mr. McHolland and either ask him the questions, or he can help you get in contact with me. So thank you again for tuning in, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day.